Dadzie. I'm a principal consultant with Lucion Group Delta Simons. Welcome to my webinar on phase 3 of the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. What I'm intending to do today is to increase our awareness of the scheme and the regulation and what it means to large undertakings operating in the UK. It's 3 core objectives. Firstly, I want to inform everybody about the requirements of ESOS and any changes that have come about since phase 2. We want to also identify the difference between the energy assessment and the audit process. Finally, I'm going to provide a few tips for best practice, particularly with regards to the energy action plan, which is one of those core changes that came about since phase 2 ended back in 2018 to 2019. So looking at ESOS and what it is, it's a regulation that came about and was transposed into UK law following Article 8 of the EU Energy Directive. It's mandatory assessment for large undertakings, and we will explore what that means in just a moment. And its main purpose is to identify opportunities for increasing energy efficiency and costing out payback periods associated with those interventions. Participants have traditionally been required to do 6 things under ESOS regulations. Firstly, measure your total energy consumption for buildings, transport, and key processes. So if you're a manufacturer, there's going to be process energy associated, and that needs to be determined. Participants are also required to identify significant energy consumption for at least 95% of their total energy consumption with a 5% de minimis allowance. You need to appoint a lead energy assessor. So I'm a registered lead energy assessor with Lucion Group, which means I can sign off on final reports. Participants also need to conduct energy audits for those 3 core areas and identify recommendations for improvements, costed recommendations, I should say. You also need to report final compliance to the Environment Agency as a scheme administrator and retain an evidence pack should the EA come knocking, looking for further information and evidence. There's been a number of changes since phase 2 that you need to be aware of. The compliance deadline has always traditionally been the 5th of December. So ours for phase 3 was the 5th of December 2023. However, due to a period of government consultation, this has been extended to the 5th of June 24, which is fast approaching. The de minimis rule has been reduced, which means that actually you need to identify total energy consumption for 95% of your total energy use, rather than in the past it's been 90% with a 10% de minimis allowance. Basically, the EA and BEIS are tightening up standards, so they're including a wider degree of companies, and they're saying to those companies you need to include more of your core activity within your assessment. ESOS phase 3 also requires public disclosure, whereas previous phases haven't. I think that's mainly so that actually encourages businesses to take action, because actually you need to consider what it might mean to your stakeholders and investors if you're shown not to be energy efficient or aware of your energy usage. The main purpose of this is to realise across the UK that £1.6 billion in net benefits that can be achieved by being more energy efficient. There's a number of routes to compliance as listed there. What I want to say in the slide is that you can mix and match. So your buildings can be covered off in their compliance efforts through a Green Deal assessment. Your industrial processes can meet their compliance obligations through an energy management system, ISO 50001. Whereas the ESOS assessment can just look at transport, or you could just have an ESOS assessment across all 3 areas. The ESOS energy audits are typically prioritized, but there are a number of routes that you can use. EPCs would not be included within this compliance route because they're not dependent on actual data. Few key dates to be aware of. So the qualification date is 31st of December 2022. That's a really important one to hold on to. The compliance phase is on a 4-year cycle. So from the end of phase 2, the 6th of December 2019, to the 5th of December 2023. The compliance deadline, as I said, is extended from the 5th of December 23 to the 5th of June 2024. There is a 2-year consecutive rule which means if you're a large undertaking for 2 more consecutive years between that 6th of December 2019 date to the 5th of December 2023 date, then you are a large undertaking and you will have to do an ESOS assessment. But what does it mean to be a large undertaking? Who qualifies? So if on that qualification date, which is the 31st of December 2022, you have 250 or more employees in the UK, then you would need to do an ESOS assessment. Alternatively, if you meet both criteria for turnover and balance sheet, which would say that your turnover is above 44 million and your balance sheet is above 38 million, then you need to do an ESOS assessment. Group participation is also complex. So if you're operating within a UK group and one of those subsidiaries needs to comply due to meeting either of those two above referenced compliance criteria, then the entire group is likely going to need to comply. Illustrated for you. So again, if you meet 250 employees, you qualify. If not, do you meet the threshold criteria for turnover and balance sheet? It is important, particularly in this day and age, to fully understand the requirements for group participation. It can be complex, and we often see businesses with really complex and diverse group settings. So I've tried to explain this through 3 scenarios. First scenario, you've got 3 entities here, A, B, and C. Because entity C, a subsidiary, meets the compliance criteria based on headcount, they've got over 250 employees, then all 3 entities need to do an ESOS assessment. Now you can aggregate into one assessment, or you could disaggregate, whereby you're saying, well, A and B are going to do their own assessment, but a disaggregation letter is submitted to suggest that C is going to undertake a separate assessment on their own accord. Similar setting, similar scenario, you've got 3 entities. However, because C in this scenario is overseas, A and B do not need to do an ESOS assessment because they don't meet any of the threshold criteria for companies due to headcount or due to their balance sheet and turnover. The final scenario is one that we see more often. It's one where actually the highest parent is abroad. However, because there are 4 UK entities in the UK, and one of those being B is considered to be a large undertaking, then all 4 UK entities would need to do a compliance assessment. It's important to understand the key drivers behind the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. So we'll go into a few of these in just a moment. Since 2021, there's been increased price volatility in the UK due to a surge in natural gas prices. The main reasons behind this have now been understood. So at the start of 2021, there was a increased demand in energy due to a unexpected cold snap in Europe. There's been increased demand for LNG gas from the likes of China. Increased global demand just generally for energy. At the same time, there was a shortfall in imported nuclear energy. We saw in the UK that this trend was destabilizing the energy market. So firms such as Bulb and several others went into administration. So you've got shorter supply, increased demand, prices tend to go up. At the same time, Russia's invasion of Ukraine led to supply issues. Large undertakings, large businesses in the UK typically purchase on day-ahead rates in a wholesale market. And the wholesale prices for electricity trend very closely to gas prices, because a large portion of our electricity, I think it's about 40% in the UK, is produced from gas. So if we just take a look at gas, we'll see that pence per therm prices peaked in around 2022. So if you're traditionally paying 3 or 5 pence per kilowatt hour, you're now potentially paying 10 or 15 pence or much higher. And you can only imagine what that's going to mean to your budget and your bottom line. In the same scenario, electricity prices were trending in the same way. So if you're traditionally paying 12 or 14 pence per kilowatt hour, you're now paying maybe even double that, right? Which is placing a lot of pressure on UK business. ESOS also remains aligned to the UK climate change policies. So on an annual basis, many of us will have to do an SECR statement, the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reports that go into our financial statements. Many of us also have to submit climate change agreements, and there's other mandatory systems in place. Now, whilst the qualification requirements for these systems might change, there's a lot of alignment in the mechanisms. So participants that are already doing their SECR submissions will be gathering data that they could put towards their ESOS assessment as well. And the whole point is to reduce the duplication in efforts, to make things easier, and to streamline the process for participants. It assists, it provides a bit of flexibility, and it means that you're not having to capture separate data for one report and then do it again in a different way for another. There's a number of benefits from doing your ESOS assessment. So you're identifying opportunities for cost reduction and energy savings. You're evaluating the performance of the system. It allows you to evaluate the feasibility and viability of any proposals, whether that's air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, LEDs, PIR systems. It allows you to engage further with your supply chain, and also with your own internal estates team and board as well. So many of our clients will use the ESOS assessment as a tool to embark on conversations with their board. Looking at the corporate drivers behind ESOS, I've grouped these into 4. So the threats faced by not doing any ESOS assessment: you miss out on cost saving opportunities. You look worse to your investors and shareholders because you're not in control of your energy efficiency and your costs associated with them. There's increased sanctions from the Environment Agency and fines, which will bring about reputational damage. However, if you were to do your ESOS assessment, then you're more resilient to those price fluctuations that we talked about. You can identify cost savings, thereby you're more attractive to potential investors. You can access funds more easily. There's improved legal compliance and reduced scrutiny. And actually, you've got an improved relationship with those clients, stakeholders, and employees as well, who are all very aware and knowledgeable in this day and age. So how does the energy audit then differ to the assessment? If we explore the assessment first, the assessment demonstrates how an organization can improve its performance, including its energy use, consumption, and energy efficiency. The role of the energy assessor is to set the scope and agree a methodology with the participant. The assessor will measure your total energy consumption, your TEC, and identify the 95% of total energy consumption that should be included. What is significant to your business? They'll also identify the de minimis allowance, if there is one. They will support with the energy audit. However, this can be done by participants directly. The assessor will need to sign off on that though, and also review other compliance activities, your Green Deal assessments, your DECs as well. They'll provide appropriate findings and recommendations, costed, and then provide final sign off. It is the responsibility of the participant to make the declaration to the Environment Agency, but the assessor can support you with that as well. The energy assessor is required, as I've said several times now, to measure your total energy consumption across a 12-month period. Now, this assessment should be inclusive of your reference period. So that date that I talked about at the beginning, 31st of December 2022, is really important. The ESOS assessment and the total energy consumption that it calculates should be inclusive of that date, looking at buildings, transport, and industrial processes. The audit, however, again, has its own set of standards that must be followed. It's about going on site and carrying out a series of surveillances or checks that will evaluate performance of a building, a process, or a fleet of transport. The criteria that it needs to comply with is as follows. So it analyzes energy consumption data for a whole year within a given period. Now, whilst the assessment needs to include the reference period, the energy audit can be carried out anywhere between the 6th of December 2019 and the 5th of December 2023, that 4-year period. So there's more flexibility there. You need to avoid auditing site locations used in previous compliance periods. So if you've audited sites in phase 2, you cannot use them in phase 3. Beyond that, if you audited a set of data in phase 2, it shouldn't be used in phase 3 either. It needs to identify costed recommendations and determine payback periods or potential savings, typically prioritizing lifecycle assessments over payback, but payback periods often used as a fallback position. And it needs to be carried out by a lead energy assessor that's registered. So a few tips for an effective audit. So it's important that your audits identify the significant energy demand from your buildings, plant, transport, and key processes. There's no point in skirting around the key material issues. You need to get straight to the heart of it and say, actually, here's where the key material demand is. You need to understand the settings and timings that are in place. Review your BMS schedules. We often see that there's a poor handover, particularly with new builds between the final stages of construction and operations, where the operational team aren't aware of the settings, the set points, the timings that are being implemented, and they don't know how to optimize building efficiency, or they have an FM provider, and the assumption is that the FM provider has optimized things for them, but things haven't been checked on a regular basis, and therefore your building's running inefficiently as a result. Where possible, prioritize metered data, actual data, over bills and estimates. Identify high base loads and out of hours energy. So actually, those two profiles should look very differently. Out of hours and operations, you should see a decrease in energy consumption. We've typically done cooling degree day analysis for clients where we might say, okay, fine, in the winter, what is the cooling demand, and are you benefiting from free cooling scenarios, or are you cooling excessively when temperatures outside don't require it? In reverse, are you heating excessively when it's summer and you don't need it? Make sure you involve relevant stakeholders, so map them carefully and bring them into the conversation, and develop an audit checklist, and we've done that in the work that we do with Lucion Group. It helps to streamline the process. We're going to now look at the typical opportunities that exist, and maybe a few tips of best practice. I'm going to demonstrate this by looking at a case study, a example of an ESOS phase 3 compliance assessment that we delivered for one of our clients within the airline industry. So they're a leading provider to that industry. The work that we carried out involved building energy audits of their hangars, offices, training and simulation centres. We also supported collaborated in the process energy audit. So they were able to use that process energy audit to start conversations with their flight operators and engineers, which they perhaps not had before. So we worked with their sustainability team to use ESOS assessment as a tool to capture the improvements that they're making to building design and fuel monitoring operations and the direction of travel they're going in. It's important to note that in this instance, process energy audit, I guess that's the process involved in their flights. So if me and you are going on flights to summer destinations or whatever, that's what we meant by process energy audit. Very differently, it varied to the on ground. I'd say their ground transport. In this instance, ground transportation was simply the vehicles that they use to taxi planes from A to B. It didn't involve the flights abroad that was captured in process energy. We also identified the de minimis allowance and significant energy usage. We calculated total energy consumption, payback periods associated with that. We carried out a CREM assessment, which is a carbon the carbon risk real estate monitor, which says, are you on track to decarbonize, or are you going to incur costs down the line because you're not aligned to a decarbonisation agenda? And we produced a notification report. All in all, there were over 99,000 megawatt hours of energy savings identified, largely from process energy savings that the business were already aware of and had costed, but also from building energy as well, which was quite significant and a material issue that they wanted addressed. So if we look at solely building energy audit, we group this into 5 or so categories across their estate, which include hangars and offices. Some of their buildings had really poor building fabric, particularly the hangars. So what can we do there? You can recommend insulation improvements, glazing improvements. In one particular, I believe it was the training centre, actually, the heating system was around 15 years old. So there's two options there. You could adopt a business as usual scenario where you're just upgrading those boilers for a like-for-like system. However, that's not aligned to your decarbonisation strategy, and we recognise that. So there's a second option there, looking at the decarbonisation of electric heating. So VRF systems, variable refrigerant flow systems, which is basically saying, can you use advanced kind of air conditioning systems to provide heating and cooling demand? Cooling plant also was 15 years old with a really poor efficiency rating. So the seasonal energy efficiency rating was actually about 2.95. We've recommended that those chillers be removed and new chillers with better SEER installed, 5.5 and above. There's significant HVAC demand, and they noticed that post-pandemic, actually Fridays and Mondays, really quiet. So they wanted to co-locate staff on lower ground floors in some of their offices. So we said, actually, how can we use the ESOS assessment to demonstrate how demand control ventilation would benefit the premises? You know, can you close off the top 2 floors, co-locate everybody on the lower levels, and thereby reduce your HVAC demand? Finally, in a few of their hangars and office spaces, there was limited data visibility, so we've obviously recommended that a sub-metering strategy be implemented. Wider opportunities from other projects that we worked on have sought to implement the energy hierarchy that's illustrated in the top right-hand corner. So there's a range of other interventions that we can propose. So LED installations, building management review, looking at timings and schedules, PIR, which is passive infrared systems for lights. You know, don't just install LED, install PIR, so that if there's nobody in that room, those lights will automatically dim, or implement daylight sensors. Low cost initiatives such as staff awareness campaigns also sought. And can you implement, you know, heat recovery associated with your air handling systems? There's a number of tools that we can use to promote energy efficiency. We've seen the energy hierarchy in the previous slide, but typically I like to start conversations off by reviewing the energy management matrix and positioning the company's present operations. You know, looking at those 6 areas, what does your energy policy look like? Is it strong? Is it in its infancy? Or organization, you know, do you have a committee that reports into board? How engaged are your senior directors? What's the motivation behind this? You know, how can we use IT to provide more granular data? Can you use marketing to increase staff awareness and promote more sustainable behaviors? And what investment opportunities are there? SALEX funding, for instance, if you're in the public sector. This is my final slide. As I said, one of the key introductions to phase 3 has been this energy action plan. There's a number of key dates. 2 of those are progress reports. So the start of the energy action plan period is the 6th of December 2023. The action plan itself has to be submitted by the end of this year, the 5th of December 24. The first progress report has to be submitted the very next year, so the 5th of December 25. The second progress report the year after, so the 5th of December 26. And the end of the action plan period is the 5th of December 2027 in preparation for what will be phase 4, which is already under consultation. Initiatives for providing or developing an effective action plans. So firstly, conduct a thorough review of policy and map out your stakeholders. So make sure you've defined roles and responsibilities. Develop your energy action plan to secure immediate buy-in. Carry out a performance evaluation, perhaps using the energy management matrix on the previous slide to say, what's our present position? Develop a thorough business case, so cost out any financial returns and savings that might be associated. Again, leaning on the life cycle cost assessment that you've carried out, or payback periods that you've determined as part of the ESOS assessment. Make sure this energy action plan is integrated within your corporate strategy. So it's not just a standalone piece, it meets your wider objectives as well. And finally, communicate your strategy to both internal and external stakeholders through regular monitoring and performance statements as well. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my webinar. If you do have any questions on how we can support you with your ESOS assessment, please do get in touch with Lucion Group Delta Simons. We could pick up a conversation from there. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. All the best. Bye-bye.